I would like to introduce to you the former Assistant Chief of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, Ms. Vicki Foster. Vicki will speak to us a bit about the state of policing in Charlotte and some of the things that she's seen in her more than 25 years on the police force here. Let's take a look at what Vicki Foster has to say.
So I think that, most of us kind of know the history of policing and how the history of policing started, and that African-American officers, first of all, weren't even allowed on the force for many, many, many years. And then when they were not allowed to make arrests of Caucasian citizens, and they predominantly worked in African-American neighborhoods. So, policing started off with racism. And a lot of people wanted to be police officers in those days because of what the job consisted of. And so unfortunately, that history has passed down, throughout the years. And, of course, some people truly believe that it's still absolutely embedded within most police departments. And I will say there definitely is a component of that. I truly believe that most people today want to become a police officer because they do want to help people. But of course, we always have the few, just like you do in any other job, that don't necessarily join for the right reason.
So when we think about the rate of African Americans in policing, I've heard that even today in a city like Charlotte that has a fairly high percentage of African American population, that the number of police officers continues to lag in terms of African American representation.
Yes, it does. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, first of all, I will say African American community is not necessarily interested as much in law enforcement careers as in other careers. And of course, there are a lot of reasons for that. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is there are a lot of barriers in the way that throughout the years, previous chiefs have changed to kind of help make recruiting process a lot easier, meaning going out to places where are predominantly African-American HBCUs, places where we can actually go and talk to people and really sit down and tell them about the job. But there were so many things in place that hindered African-Americans from becoming police officers. At one point in time, credit was an issue. And so our police chief from 9-10 years ago, Chief Moreau, he actually changed that to where, as long as you have a payment plan and you are working towards whatever it is that's going on with your credit, then, we can work with you. So as you can imagine, credit was one of those things that kept a lot of African Americans from being able to qualify for the job. So you have those barriers. And some of those things where people had used their credit, and gotten something in their name. And so those type things. So there have been barriers. And then on top of that, a lot of our African-Americans don't feel like they go to college that they need to work at a police department. They don't really see policing as a professional profession. And so we've tried to change that, attitude and try to show, that we are a professional organization. And then, we have to be very honest about the things that have gone on across this country. And when people see that, and then they also don't see a lot of people that look like them in certain roles and departments, it doesn't become a very welcoming place to them. So just between all the barriers, and there's a lot of other different barriers, there's a lot of, driving records and just associations, of people that you can't associate with. And you have some people that their whole family is somebody that we wouldn't allow you to associate with. And so we have to be real honest about, some of those things. But yeah, there are a lot of barriers in place for African Americans. And then also the fact that what's going on across the nation.
As I listened to former Assistant Chief Foster speak, I heard her emphasize that policing in general has its roots in a racialized system. She mentioned that not only was the origin of this profession tied to groups that were sent to capture fugitive enslaved people, but that there continue to be racist dimensions of contemporary policing. In this regard, she mentioned that the number of African Americans in police departments lags behind their representation in the larger population. We need to increase the welcome for African Americans to feel at home on the police rolls.
So just one other question that came up as you were talking. had to do with this notion of officers often giving different commands to Black people than they do to white folks, and people feeling as though their dignity is at risk. You mentioned something about an inherent fear of Black men. Tell me more about that.
Well, I mean, I think that, history has shown us that there is a form of inherent fear of African American males. And, just as an example of, and maybe it's just strength, I'm not sure what it is, but like the Atlanta case, for example. So you have two officers and you have, the one guy that had been in the car and had been drinking. And after the altercation started, he was literally tossing them two guys around like rag dolls. And these are people that, probably work out 4 and 5 times a week. And so I just think that there's a inherent fear. It's no different than, the Farrell case and, someone running at you that, that what they have nothing in their hands. So it's that fear of you're going to be able to overtake me. And so that is a fear that we cannot change. I mean, that's just not a fear that we'll be able to change. That's going to be something that someone else has to figure out within themselves. Why do I feel that way? And we also have to look at ourselves and say, what is our propensity as African Americans, to resist? So we do have to look at the things that people weigh. But yeah, I mean, there's an inherent fear of how African American men in particular respond with the police and correlate and how they talk and how they communicate. And that right there within itself sometimes leads to some of the things that we're seeing across the nation.
So white officers' inherent fear of Black men puts Black men at greater risk?
Well, I think anybody's fear of anybody puts you at a greater risk. I mean, if I don't want to engage with you for whatever reason, and I'm not talking about just communication, like if I want to keep my distance from you for whatever reason that is, whether it's he's 300 pounds and I'm 150 pounds, I think anytime that occurs and that fear sets in, I think that you're going to have things that happen that would not happen if that fear was not there. I mean, we all know how we act when we are fearful of something or a situation, and it does emotionally charge you. Yeah, I mean, and fair or unfair, it does.
So thank you for that. It's I don't quite know where to go at this point in time with that, because I think that it's a frightening notion to think that an officer's internal fear can put someone else at greater risk. How do we police that fear? How do we shift that attitude so that we can look at a white suspect, a Black suspect, all of them with the same lens? That's where I'd love to see policing go.
And I think that's where it's about relationships and getting to know people. Because if you only know people for what a particular group they think is either known for, or if African Americans are considered to be violent people, if you don't get to know people and you go upon what you see day in and day out, and I always like to remind people that, remember this, people don't call police for tea. Okay, so every call they go to every day is doom and gloom. Okay, nobody's calling you to come over because things are going great. And once you have been in this business for a long period of time, it's very hard not to become jaded. So you think about, people that work in the same communities. You got some, they love the community they work in, would never want to leave. And then you got people that are in communities that every day someone's calling them a pig or calling them whatever. And you start to grow, you internalize it. You try to tell these officers, don't take it personal. But you know what? I think that's a lot easier said than done. And those are things that we oftentimes don't think about when someone's working 8 hours a day and every time they ride by, the finger goes up and all this other stuff that the public doesn't see. And it starts to taint your vision about a group of people. And it's hard sometimes for them to separate. Everybody is not like this group, or everybody's not like this individual. We're individuals. And I think that's where we struggle because of how policing is. And I think until people decide that getting to know each other is one of the key things, we're going to continue to struggle.
All right. Well, thank you.
So I heard Vicky Foster suggest that an inherent fear of African-American men contributed to the reactions of white officers to Black males. Race-based fear causes things to happen, as she said, that can put Black people's lives at risk. Until people decide that getting to know each other across the racial divide, we're going to continue to struggle in this way. There's much more that former Assistant Chief Foster said that describes things that she would like to do to reform policing, including standardizing policies across the nation, greater care for recruiting people with more careful examination of why people really want to do this job, and helping officers to remember at the end of the day that it is the community first, and the need to hire people whose heart is for the community, who will be held responsible to living up to a community first code.